Hello! Today I'm going to be looking at the itchiest, bittiest little paint palette I've ever owned. It is the Art Toolkit Demi palette, so it is half the size of the original palette, and I am going to fill it up with some paints today. So let's get into it, shall we? So by comparison, here is the original size Art Toolkit, and this one is the size of a business card holder. So I'll just pull it out so you can see it. This one has 28 quarter pans, and here is the swatch card for all of the colours that I have in here. I've used this one a lot in the past year, and I'll show you what it looks like. It is an absolute mess. Look at the state of that, and you can see how much of the paint I've actually used, which is quite a lot on some of these. So I've really enjoyed this. I think it is fantastic for travelling, and I'm definitely going to travel with it again. But I could not resist this little guy, which they released, I think, afterwards, and it's the Demi palette, or half the size. I've not used it yet, so it's in its most pristine condition. If I can get it open. This one's a little harder to open for some reason. I guess it needs a bit of wear and tear on it. There we go, finally. Isn't that cute? So it has 12 of the same size pans as what's in this set, and then there's a little mixing area up here. Because I have a lot of relatively standard watercolours in this one, I thought I would add different colours in here so I can extend the entire palette from 28 colours up to 40, and I have a few different paints which I'm intending on putting in. It's going to be a rather unconventional paint palette, this one. I need to dig out all of the colours that I'm going to use. I had thought about this for a while just to try and decide which extra colours to add in here. I'll show you those in a moment. But just before I do that, I have actually got another swatch card that I've done in my sketchbook here. I've used this for travelling. I'm not done. I've used about half of the book. And here are all of the colours with their names. So this has been a really useful palette. I've liked all of the colours. Some of them I've used more than others, but I think overall it's been really great. And I am going to continue with this colour palette. So what I'll also be doing today is giving this one a bit of a clean and refilling some of those colours where I've reached the bottom of the little pans. My desk is in a giant mess because I've been fiddling around with colour combinations, but two of them are going to have to go in there whether I like it or not. One of them is German Greenish Raw Umber because I just took the lid off and it has exploded, so I'm going to try and rescue as much paint and put them in one of these little pans. And the other one is Corniquet Coral because that's also done the same thing, and up here it's all in the lid, so I'm going to have to sit here for a while and try and put some of these into these little palettes. Oh gosh, what a mess. I've managed to get everything under control again, so I have two of the pans poured out, one with Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Coral and the other with Daniel Smith's, where is it? German Greenish Raw Umber. So those are both definitely in. I am on the fence with a few other colours. One of them is this indigo, which is by Van Gogh, and the only reason is I really like the colour, but when I'm looking at it over here, it kind of looks like there's a bit of chalkiness coming through. So I made the decision that I'm not putting in anything lower than artist grade, so I'm afraid the Van Gogh indigo is out, but I really do want to have an indigo. That's one colour I've been missing from my other palette, so I will choose one of the others that I have, probably the Daniel Smith version, which I like as well. The other one that I'm not entirely sure about, because I'm going to have these three. I'm leaving this one out because this is also not a professional grade. This is the Shinhan Bordeaux, which is actually a really pretty colour, but I think I'm just going to leave it out because these two are kind of similar to it. So I've got these three reds to go in, and I'm trying to decide if I want to add this Anthraquinoid Scarlet, which I haven't really used much of either. That is this colour here. I do need to dither a bit more, but I'm thinking most of these other colours are going to be in. This Nickel Azo Yellow is also really insanely bright and is so much brighter than everything else in the palette, so I'll think about that one too. What a messy screen this looks like, but I realised I haven't actually explained my colour choices here and the reason why I have these particular paints. These are all pretty much new paints to me. I've used them a little bit, I've made a couple of videos about them. I made a video about these three colours when I first bought them, but I haven't used them much in a palette, so I thought it would be nice to actually include these in here because I really like all three of these colours. And then Naphthalmide Maroon I only just got, I think it was late last year, so I've not really had a chance to use this one at all. I also have a couple of random ones from Schminker. One of them is actually Random Grey from last year. I don't think there has been one released for 2023. Let me know if there is, because I'd be really curious to get that. And I also picked up this Ice Blue, which is like a limited edition paint. I've never squeezed it even into a half pan of any kind, so this is totally unused, but I want to add that in. German Greenish Raw Umber, I did a video on, is this the ugliest colour by Daniel Smith? Oh gosh, the comments I got in that, I had quite a lot of people who were rather upset with me. Sorry about that, it was just my own opinion and a bit of a facetious video. Oh boy, did that get some people riled up. I actually don't mind this colour, it is quite useful, and I thought today I would put it in my palette because it gave me no choice anyway, having exploded when I opened the lid. The other one that I have here that I really haven't used is Anthraquinoid Scarlet. I can't remember when I bought this. I think there was rumours that this particular pigment was going to be discontinued, and I don't know if that's actually the case anymore, so I'm kind of stuck with this tube that I haven't really used. And the other three that I really want to put in here are those Supervision Layering Watercolours that I recently did a video of. All three are really pretty. There's Blue Orange, Blue Violet and Rubia Purple. I thought that this palette would be great to add these ones in. So it is a very motley collection of colours. Alright, I've made my decision. I'm going to squeeze these in before I can change my mind again, but I am going to keep the Anthraquinoid Scarlet in because I just couldn't really think of another colour I could replace it with, and as I said, it's one that I haven't really used, so it's going in. I've also just swapped out the Van Gogh Indigo for my Daniel Smith one because I know this one's really good. Of all the colours, this is the one I've used most in other palettes, but I have no indigo in this little set here. The closest I have is the Eden Throne Blue, so it's kind of filling in a little void around this area, and I'm hoping I can use this palette on its own, although I don't have a really blue, but it's mainly going to be used in conjunction with this one, so I figure I might as well pick things that are going to be weird, and I'll see if I can come up with some kind of painting for them. But firstly, I need to squeeze them into these tiny, tiny little pans. They are so difficult to not make a mess with, because the smaller the pan, the bigger the tube. It's really hard getting those in there. But let's have a go. I am pretty sure I'm going to keep them in this order as well. I've pulled all the little pans out because it's really difficult to get them in and out, and I'm going to get paint all over myself if I try to put them back in when the paints are still wet. So I've actually just fit them into this palette. They fit perfectly into those wells. I could put the lid on and keep them away from the cat while they dry, because Gandalf in particular is notorious for turning up when I have wet paints out. It's like he materializes and knows when I have just poured my paints. So this is a good way to let them set before I put them back in the pan. But all of the colours I have chosen don't have honey in them, so they should set pretty quickly within about 24 hours or so. These mini pans are so fiddly, and the large 15mm tubes just felt so cumbersome trying to pour into them. But I didn't make as much mess as I thought I would, though I did get quite a lot of paint on my hands. But that's more from wiping excess paint into a tissue and then forgetting that there's wet paint in it when I pick it up again. I'm glad I thought to put the little metal pans inside this porcelain palette because it kept them all organised and I had much less chance of knocking them over. The three Supervision paints were the easiest to squeeze out. They just had a really good paint consistency. Some of the others were a bit thicker and needed to be stirred in the pan like this one, and it was even harder to pick up the mini pans once there was wet paint in them. I squeezed out a bit too much ice blue and it kept coming out of the tube, so I was frantically trying to get the lid back on. Ah yes, what a lovely mess that one made. And here's a Supervision one by comparison, so much easier to pour. I did overfill that pan a little bit though. The paints do shrink down a bit once they've dried, so it's usually a good idea to maybe fill it up about 2/3 of the way, let it shrink down and then refill another layer on top. Not so easy to do that with tiny pans. Oh, what a mess I've made today. It's all over my hands. I now have 12 filled little pans and I'm going to set them aside to dry. I think off camera I'm going to be working on the other palette as well, because that really needs to be cleaned up. Since my hands are already painty, I figured this is the perfect time to do that. Just checking in while I clean this because I've discovered something. I remember someone putting up some advice that you can get rid of all of this paint staining off your mixing trays by using a magic eraser, these little chucks thingies. There's a few different brands out there and you can find these in supermarkets, places like that. So I've got one out and it really does actually seem to be working. I've already managed to lift some of it. So you just add some water to it and then it should hopefully buff it out. So it looks like it's taking quite a lot of that off. It's never going to be perfect, but it is taking some of that stain which I could not get off with a regular sponge. So that's good. It really does work. Yay! Not bad at all. It got almost all of it. I'm really happy about that. It's a few hours later. They're actually looking mostly set already, so I think I'm going to risk it and put them in. I've made a tiny little swatch card to fill out, and the other thing I'm going to do is in this little area here, I find that the pans tend to slide down and then half of it gets stuck under there. So I'm going to cut a tiny bit of this leftover foam stuff and just slot some of that in there so that the quarter pans will sit up a little bit and won't slide down into that groove. Okay, that one's still pretty wet, and I got it on my finger, but I got them in, and they are magnetised, which is why they're not going to fall off. It's quite a strong magnet too. So now I'll paint this little swatch card. There's no room for any names on here, and I used a little brush just to paint out the colours, alternating them so that the squares could dry and they wouldn't run into each other. All this really is just to give me an idea of what the colours look like on watercolour paper, and when I'm painting in my book, I can just quickly refer to these rather than trying to figure out what the colours are from the dried pans. It's not so difficult for bright colours, but some of the darker ones it's impossible to tell what the colour is. Like if you look at the one in the top right corner, it looks pretty much the same as the one I'm about to paint now, which is the indigo. And I still managed to make the paint run, oh dear. I fixed that up eventually, so I let that lot dry and then I came back to it to paint in the other squares. Watercolours do tend to have quite a drying shift when on 100% cotton paper, and sometimes I will actually paint another layer over the swatches just to get a brighter, more saturated representation of the colours, but today I just did one layer. That nickel azo yellow is insanely bright when it's wet. And this one I'm painting is that blue-orange, which initially looks like a murky green, but you can probably see the orange is already starting to split out of it. That ice blue in the left-hand corner is so pale, it's kind of hard to see it on here. I'm wondering about how useful this colour's going to be. But here we go, I swatched them in my book as well, and I made a bigger one so that I could write the names in. This is on the inside cover of my sketchbook, and it is not watercolour paper, unfortunately, so the paint is not sitting very well. But at least it gives me an idea of the colours again, and with the names. I also put little dots next to the ones which are the supervision colours, and then open circles for the Schminke paints, and the ones with nothing are the Daniel Smith ones. As I was painting these out, I was thinking, have I made a mistake with this palette? It's just so weird, and I'm not entirely sure how useful these colours are as a group, though I'm really glad I put that indigo in. It's such a great dark blue, to contrast with that really pale ice blue. Once again, I let everything dry fully before I painted in the other squares, because I have very limited room for my swatches and I didn't have space between them. Also because I was too lazy to draw spaces between them. As I said before, it's really just a guide so that when I'm travelling and don't have any of my actual paint shoes with me, I can remember what the colours are. And it's only when painting them out now that I realised how close in colour the Rubia purple is with that naphthalmide maroon. Though I think the maroon does actually get quite a lot darker in its mass tone. That nickel azo yellow is just so much brighter than everything else, it really does stand out as the odd one. This blue-orange is such a strange colour, but I do like it and it is actually quite a useful one. The blue-violet's nice too, just maybe a little bit too much purple in it, but the three blues here are rather strange. And last up is the random grey, which I really like. Well, that's the strangest set of colours that I've ever put together. I'm not entirely sure how useful this palette is going to be, but at least I've used up some of my miscellaneous colours in it. And I think together with this one, it's just going to give me extra colours. I have actually filled this palette up. I've cleaned it all and it's got its little swatch sheet back in there, so that's looking pretty good. I will leave these open to fully dry because some of them haven't yet done that and they're quite wet underneath that skin of paint, so I'll definitely leave those out for a few days, but they look much better now that they're filled. I really wanted to see if I could do a painting with this set, and I found the most adorable photo on the Facebook reference photo group, which I'm putting up here now, and then I cropped it down a bit to make it a portrait format so I could fit it onto an A4 sheet of watercolour paper. I've painted the background with different colours as well, so I've done a really light wet on wet layer here using a few different reds and purples. I let it fully dry and now I'm painting the teddy bear. I will come back to that background later. That German greenish raw umber was perfect for the teddy bear, mixed in with the random grey for the darker areas. Those two as a combination were most excellent, and they're both incredibly useful, so I'm very glad I added them into the palette. I'm painting fairly light layers to begin with, and I will go over it again to increase the saturation and value. I used the mixing palette a little bit as well, and it was fine as long as you only want a few colours, but I had to keep blotting paint off so I could put different colours on, and in the end I got a bit sick of it and pulled out another palette to paint on. I used that blue-green for the rope that the teddy bear is holding, and some very thick indigo for the black areas of the teddy bear's eyes and nose. I mixed naphthalmide maroon with, I think, some of the German greenish raw umber, just to get a slightly browner tone, but it's still quite reddish. I think some indigo for the deep shadows, and then I painted in the bow with the blue violet by Supervision, and I tried to add in a bit of ice blue as well for the highlights, so I could say I had at least used it. I think the colours that I didn't really use in this were the Anthraconoid Scarlet, which is that top left one, mainly because it was too orange for what I wanted for the background. I wanted more of the pinky purple side of things, but the Quinacridone Coral was actually really great for doing brighter areas. And I also didn't really use the Nickel Azo Yellow because it really was too bright and just didn't fit into this particular painting. I possibly used it a tiny bit here and there near the end of it. But otherwise, I'd say my most used colour in this particular painting was the German greenish raw umber, and I managed to make it all the way down to the bottom of the pan on that one, so I'm going to have to refill it. For the most part, I used this sable brush by Isaro. It's a beauty. I didn't want to use a large brush for this because they are tiny pans. This piece of paper, in fact, is a bit too big for how I would normally use this palette for smaller sketchbooks and things like that. But nonetheless, I was able to get a full painting on an A4 sized piece of paper, so I'm really happy about that. And now it was just a matter of building up the layers until I was happy. And I really like how this painting turned out. It's one of my favourites so far this year. Done. I'm actually really happy with this palette. It turned out better than I was expecting, and I really love the teddy painting. I think he turned out so cute, and the colours in the background are super pretty. This Rubia Purple is such a lovely colour, and it works really well with the Quinacridone Coral, as does the darker Naphthalmide Maroon. The blue-green worked out quite well for the rope, and this German greenish raw umber was excellent for the teddy bear's fur, along with that random grey. I just touched it. Anyway, you can see I have used quite a lot of it. Because this one is low tinting, it does require a bit more paint than some of the others. So I will be refilling this, topping them up to make sure they're all nice and full. They did shrink down a bit. You can see that they're not that full, and so they will require another layer. I'll clean this up as well because there's only a very limited mixing room, and it would work better for a smaller picture than what I did, but you can do a larger picture with them. It's just a little bit more challenging, and I've just got maroon on my thumb. These paints are still really sticky because there's a lot of water in them. What a mess. So I think I'm just going to finish up here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing me fill up this tiny little palette and the rather strange array of colours that I ended up with. If you'd like to see the original video of me filling up this palette, I'll link that video up here and possibly one or two others on the screen so you can check those out as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and you might want to click that subscribe button for more videos. I will see you all again really soon in my next video, and I hope you're having a fantastic day out there. Swatch you later. Bye!